get to it. Thanks everyone for joining tonight. Couldn't imagine a better way to spend your Thursday evening in late February. So thanks for being here. We have 4 awesome EV owners to talk and answer your questions about what it's like to drive electric. And tonight, Generation180 is partnering with EVNoire, Dr. Shelley Francis. Thanks so much for being here with us. We're going to tell you about each of our organizations a little bit and then get right to it. Next slide, Shakaya. So simple agenda, welcome and introductions. Then we'll have Q&A with our electric vehicle drivers, get to know what it's like. They'll answer all your questions, everything you've ever wanted to know. If you have questions, put them in the Q&A. We'll make sure and get to as many of them as we can. And then we'll wrap up. We're looking at about 45 minutes this evening. Hopefully that works for everyone, yeah? And thanks again, Dr. Francis, for being here and the EV owners as well. All right, so a little bit about Generation180. We're a national nonprofit organization working to inspire and equip individuals to take action on clean energy. And we do that really through 3 main campaigns. The first is called Flip the Energy Script, which is really a communication strategy. We say, hey, instead of focusing on climate doom and gloom, let's talk about clean energy optimism. You know, we work with unexpected advocates and influencers and musicians and sports personalities, all to reach people where they are and tell this clean energy story. It's better and it can work for you too. Our Solar for All Schools program and Electrify Our Schools program works to help schools across the country go solar. You know, one of the biggest costs of a school is energy. So going solar really allows them to free up their budget and spend that money on other things like teacher salaries, for example. And then also, of course, electric school buses. We help schools transition to electric school buses. We've all been behind a big yellow diesel bus that emits fumes. It's no place for our kids to be. The program that Shakaya and I lead is called Electrify Your Life and Electrify Your Ride. Electrify Your Life is about how to adopt clean energy in your home, and Electrify Your Ride, hey, it's all about electric vehicles. And we have 4 great EV owners tonight to answer all your questions. So with that, I'll pass it to Shelley.
Thank you so much. So I'm also going to be joined by, let's see, is Chris all here as well? So I'm going to go ahead and go right into it. So again, we're happy to be here and welcome everyone that's here to learn more about what it's like to be an EV owner. So let's kick right into the next slide. Okay, so just going into a little bit about EVNoire for those who are not as familiar with us. So we work to both amplify awareness and adoption of multimodal electric vehicles all across the United States and beyond. And we want to really focus in on making sure that those different mechanisms and mobility methods are accessible and inclusive to all communities. And really what our vision is that we're envisioning a world that's free from transportation emissions so that all communities can reap the benefits of what it's like to be in a community and in a society that's free from carbon pollution from ICE vehicles or internal combustion vehicles. Next slide. So just a little bit about what we do in terms of our work. So again, we do a bit of advocacy, grassroots engagement in terms of stakeholder engagement. We also do media outreach, speaking engagements, and a lot of research that focuses on understanding the factors that are associated with transportation and e-mobility adoption. One of the things that we also have a significant role in is looking at workforce and economic development. We created an e-mobility pipeline program that really trains the next generation of career professionals for career paths in the e-mobility sector. So again, our work has a holistic focus, focusing on public health, as well as looking across that e-mobility sector from e-bikes and scooters all the way up to medium heavy duty commercial vehicle electrification. Next. So we are founding members of, obviously, EVNoire is our parent organization. And so it's a membership organization that's the nation's largest network of diverse EV drivers and enthusiasts. And here you can see some of our statewide chapters from around the country. We're also the co-founders of a global EV alliance with about 70 countries and several 100,000 members that provides insight, data, best practices from across the globe. Great things and resources that we can utilize right here in the United States. Next. As part of those organizations, we are international lead organizers of National Drive Electric Week, as well as Drive Electric Earth Month now. And so those are two of the largest education and outreach and engagement events focused on accelerating electrification. And so those are just a couple of things that we wanted to highlight. Go ahead on to the next slide. So, all right. So before we jump into our discussion today, I would be remiss without talking about this really important outreach and education program that really ties nicely into the Ask an EV Owner platform. So we have launched a statewide program called Electrifying Virginia Partnership Program, and I'll give you some quick highlights from that project before we get into our discussion tonight. Next slide. So the overview of this project, it is a multimodal campaign. It's an awareness campaign engaging partners from across the ecosystem. So we want to engage communities, governments, businesses, advocacy organizations, public health entities to really make sure that we're educating the full breadth of our community here in the Commonwealth about the benefits of electric vehicles and electric mobility. Next slide. So the idea is that it's a statewide campaign. It's both in person and digital. And the idea is that we're going to do engaging activities such as op-eds, articles, social media campaign. We're going to do virtual programs like what we're doing now, as well as in-person ride and drive events. We were just at the Richmond Auto Show this past weekend. And then we also did EV Day at the Capitol on February 8th. And we're doing really trying to engage in a really intentional manner in rural communities and urban communities, in all communities, so that they know about the benefits of EV adoption. They have resources to go to look to get more educated and learn about the different incentives and rebates that are available. And we can't do this without deep partnerships with members and organizations and communities from all across the state of Virginia. The next slide. And as I was saying, we can't do this without all these different great partners. Well, of course, EVNoire is one of the partners, Generation180, Virginia Clean Cities, and all of those partners here and more are joining every day. So again, the idea is that we really want to leave no stone or no EV unturned in the state of Virginia so that we can make sure that folks have all the information and tools and incentives that they need to make informed decisions about their mobility options, but clean mobility options. Next slide. And then as a thank you, this is just some of our members from across the state. Just again, thank you for the opportunity to be here. We're excited to answer your questions. You're going to hear from some really awesome thought leaders and folks just like you who used to drive fossil fuel vehicles, or maybe you're now driving or considering getting an EV. They can answer all the questions that you may have to help inform your decision making. So Stuart, back over to you. Let's get into this.
All right. So there we go. Yeah. We know you have a lot of questions. Put them in the Q&A. We'll get to them. That's hilarious. All right. So first question, everyone wants to know how long you've been driving an electric vehicle, and then just tell us where you're from. So Rachel, how about we start with you? How long have you been driving an EV, and where are you from?
Hi, everybody. I'm from Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, which is in the Philly metro area. And I drive a 2023 Chevy Bolt EUV, and I've been driving it since August of last year.
Awesome. Brian, how about you?
So we live in Montgomery County, Maryland. And we're fortunate to have currently 5 EVs in our family.
Wow.
Yeah, the way I describe that is we have Sex in the Driveway with Valkyrie, our 23 Rivian R1T, and Mystique, which is our 23 Fisker Ocean. So we've got those 5 EVs across 3 brands that we're fortunate enough to have it in our family.
Okay, I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions about Fiskers. You don't see a lot of those. Nika, how about you? How long you been driving an EV, and where are you from? Muted, Nika.
Hi, I'm Nika Mendoza. I'm from Richmond, Virginia. I drive Audi e-tron S, and I've been driving that since September of 2022.
All right, and Danielle, how about you? Where are you living, and how long you been driving?
I'm living in Atlanta, Georgia. Originally from Ohio. So I drive a 2023 Volkswagen ID4. And I haven't had it, not quite yet a year. So I got it towards the end of last year. And so far, so good.
That's good. Yeah, we love people that have been driving. Have a good mix of people who've been driving a long time and a not so long time to get all those range of experiences.
Awesome. So I'm going to jump in next and take a little deeper dive into your EV experiences. So of course, when you decided to make this transition from your gas vehicle or your diesel vehicle, I'm sure it raised some eyebrows, maybe raised some questions and some flags in some households or in, neighbors, coworkers came up to you and asked a lot of different questions. So let's talk about that for a minute. So we'll sit here for a moment. So tell us or describe to us how your friends and family members reacted when you decided to go electric. Did you get a lot of questions? Did you get pushback? Did you get a lot of yays? So talk to us about that. Let's start off with Nika. Let's start with you first.
Yeah, so when I decided to get my EV, most of my friends and family, or just like random strangers that would see me in a parking lot, it would just be questions on how are you charging? How much range do you get? Is it fast? Questions like that. Does it feel like a traditional ICE car? Or, can you tell a difference between it being electric and ICE? So I got questions like that. Oh, and how much does it cost to charge? People trying to figure out how to convert, gas mileage to to kilowatts. So questions like that. And it's always been just positive dialogue for the most part. But I will say, I had a few people, well, what about when you get stuck, when you run out of electricity, then what will you do? So other than that, it's just been positive and pretty engaging.
Okay, all right, cool. Anybody else have any similar or different experiences as they transitioned and jumped into the EV space? The reaction or feedback that you got from neighbors or friends, coworkers, was it similar or different to what Nika experienced?
For me, it was mostly positive. I think a lot of people in my circle are sort of EV curious, I guess I'd say, but like not ready to take the plunge themselves. And so they were like, oh, you're getting an EV and you can tell us how it is. So there was that reaction. Then there was also my dad who was like, but you're not going to be able to hear the engine. And that was very important to him, and lots of other people too like to hear the engine. And then my husband was concerned about the long trips and if it would even be a viable vehicle to take on long trips, because at the time we both had older cars, and so you'd want to take the newer car on the long trip, and so he was worried that we wouldn't be able to take the newer car on the long trip.
That's really interesting. I think that feeds really good well into Stuart, what you were going to talk about next in terms of some of those initial concerns and questions.
Definitely, yeah. We hear a lot about range anxiety. We also hear that ownership cures range anxiety. So were there things that stood out that were initial barriers, but then once you started driving an EV, you realized it wasn't such a big deal? Anything? I imagine charging is one, so would love to hear that. But anything that kind of you were worried about, and then you found out, hey, that's actually not something to be concerned about.
I can jump in on that one. The both range anxiety and charging are two common questions that come up. Even within our home, I would have gotten an EV a while ago. And just keep our ICE car as just, a secondary car. It started to get older, but, friends and family coming to visit, that would have just been an additional vehicle. So with my husband, he had the same, Rachel, the same concerns. Well, what do we do on longer trips? And then here, especially within Georgia, the range anxiety is real. Charging stations can be few and far between in the Southeast. So he was like, well, how do you plan for a longer trip? And what type of vehicle and range and things like that. So the beautiful thing about being an EV hybrid noire, you can do a lot of ride and drives. So I don't like going to car dealerships, but going along ride and drives and working on different projects, talking with folks, I already knew what I liked. I already sat in a car, I already drove a car, several, and we did what works best. And so the range was resolved with just him asking questions. And I'm like, well, it's the same, we can do, with the Volkswagen ID4, we get about 250, 60 miles. So, and that's just standard. There are long range vehicles. So with this one, we just, got with the Pro, we had no issues. We've done 2 longer trips to family members or in my in-laws who are right outside of Charlotte. We did have to stop and charge, but planning for that. So it is planning involved, especially in the Southeast. You don't want to get stuck, but all the same things in a traditional ICE or combustible vehicle are the same in an electric vehicle. You run out of gas, you run out of gas. You run out of charge, you run out of charge. You got to walk either way. You got to call AAA, you got to call roadside service. All those things are the same. So planning for the what if is the same. It's just the how and the what is a little different. So that helped resolve some of the planning. So that is a difference. And the beautiful thing about that is all you got to do is just plug it into your car. They'll tell you where, just like a gas station is on Google Maps or Waze, same thing, it'll just tell you where the charging station. So instead of going to BP or, Shell or Sunoco, you're going to Blink or ChargePoint or Electrify America. And those top 5 or 10 are more readily available, which why we decided on the ID4, because for the first 3 years of the lease, which we only got it for 3 years, because I wasn't 100% sold on it, but I loved it. With Electrify America, I think I paid $16 in the past 5 or 6 months to charge, to get a full tank. I don't know, and I don't want to assume anybody or the participants here, but I bet you paid more than $16 to fill up your car. So that was a huge incentive and bonus, and we charge at home. So if it's not an Electrify America, which are prevalent, like a BP station, that sold him. And he's always like, hey babe, I'm just charging and I'm running in a Target real quick. Do you need anything? I'm like, who are you? No, I'm good. Thank you.
Chris, was there something about that you were worried about before you switched to electric that now you're like,
well,
I
do have a story. So I started out with a used About 6.5 years ago, I bought a used Nissan Leaf first gen, and my place of work was about 15 miles away, so it wasn't very far. Uh, However, being new to electric vehicles and knowing the nuances, I had my fears and worries. And that was a very different time 6.5 years ago, versus 10 years ago. That was a much different time too. But going with a Leaf that has lost about 20% of its range at this point, because of the, charging, there's no thermal charging implementations for keeping the battery cool on those Leaves. So, I remember not charging, and you'd forget to plug in the night. You had to go to work, headed to work, and all there was just a level 1, like what you plug your cell phone into. And I was able to charge up at work and had enough to make it home. And I'm just saying this because I want to make a point that 6.5 years ago, 7 years ago, things were a lot different. And here today, if I could have made it with a Nissan Leaf, today we're in a much better place, wherein that is not such an issue anymore. Depending on how far you have to go, and your choice of vehicle should depend on what your needs are, and kind of do a little research in it, because every vehicle has a purpose, whether it's a pickup truck, small round town vehicle. You have all different ranges out there today. So it's just good to do your research. But I just wanted to share that I had my worries, and it still worked out. I never had to call the tow truck.
Well, that's a good point too. Gas engines have basically evolved as far as they can go, but electric vehicles, compared to when the first Leaf came out, it's light years ahead. So the technology and the infrastructure is really evolving. That's a great point. Shelley, pass it to you for next question.
Absolutely. So I want to find out where people are getting information and resources, or where they were, when they decide to make that transition. But before I go to that question, I want to go back to Brian, because Brian, you are the road tripping king, and I want you to talk a little bit about your experiences taking road trips and doing, long distance driving, particularly in your ocean, but just broadly too, like what has been your experience as an EV, owner of multiple types of EVs doing those road trips?
Yeah, we live here in Maryland, but my wife grew up on Cape Cod, the outer Cape Cod in Massachusetts. One way from here to there is almost 520 miles. So it's a pretty significant trip. And believe it or not, we do that trip at least a half a dozen times every year. I didn't mention this earlier, but we took delivery of our first EV on Valentine's Day 2013. So to Chris's point, the road tripping experience at that time was very, very different. And that vehicle had a 60 kilowatt hour battery, right? And so the range on that thing in terms of real world range was about 210 miles. And the infrastructure certainly was not what it is today. So it did require some planning. But we've been doing that trip from here to Cape Cod ever since then. And last year, when we stepped into the world of CCS vehicles, first with the Rivian and then with the Fisker, I think we had that Fisker for 2 weeks before we took that trip to Cape Cod. And I wish I could tell you it was uneventful. It was not. The first charging stop at the end of the New Jersey Turnpike was uneventful, like you want it to be. But our second charging stop was where it got interesting, because there was an incompatibility between that vehicle and the EVgo charging unit at the site that we went to. And it was relatively cold. We pulled in with about 50 miles of range. And over the course of an hour, trying to figure out why the vehicle wouldn't charge, the state of charge dropped to about 10 miles left. And we realized ultimately that it wasn't going to happen. And so we had to look for an alternative. And this is one of the things that I would share with anyone getting into an EV. There are certain things that you have to have, right? You have to have the apps for the charging networks. You have to have apps like PlugShare, which, regardless of charging network, will give you a sense of what charging is around you. And you can filter by level 2 or level 3. And to make a long story short, in this instance, when we ran into that problem at a very low state of charge on a road trip, we used PlugShare to find a nearby charger. That one had a combination of level 2 and level 3. We got there, the level 3 literally was out of commission. There were 2 electric vans there working on them. So we just ended up having to spend a little bit more time charging on a level 2 just to get enough charge to get to the next level 3. So it made for an interesting first trip with our new EV.
But it left you thirsting for more because you've been in this EV life for 11 years now. So you're like what they call an OG EV driver and enthusiast.
Yeah, it's one of those deals where once we went EV, we were never going back. And this is about the most exciting time in the EV transformation, right? There are so many great options that are out there. You're not stuck with one type of vehicle. And there's significant funding now to enhance the charging networks. I don't know if you guys can hear this, but we happen to have a dog. I call her an attention hound. Go away, go away. She's here looking for attention. But yeah, it's really an exciting time to be in the EV space because of all of the different options and the build out of the infrastructure to support it. We're not there yet, but this is, I think, a really exciting time for it.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like, obviously, even just a couple years ago, when you think about charging infrastructure and access to different types of charging infrastructure, it looks very different now with, the rollout of federal funding to expand charging networks. You've got, corridor charging. So every 50 miles, you're going to have access to charging infrastructure, as well as resources to build out community, so city charging, rural charging. So the access to charging looks really different, or will look very different over the next 12 to 36 months. In addition, now that the chargers, we're utilizing the NACS system where like you can use the Tesla charging network, that really opens the door to a lot more charging sites, charging stations. So that really helps address that range anxiety that, many of the folks who are considering, transitioning, that will hopefully alleviate some of that apprehension. But wanting to move on to just thinking about like, hey, when you were starting to do your search, we're looking for resources about where to go for, getting an EV, or where do I find incentives, or how do I compare the different types of EVs, or even find an EV in my community to purchase. What are some of the resources that you utilize to get more information? So like, where did you go? Who did you go to? So I want to start off with you, Rachel, and then maybe we can go over to Danielle, and others can join in as well. So go for it, Rachel.
So I didn't know anybody who had an EV, so I didn't really have anybody to ask. But I was like very focused on the tax credit. And so I got my information primarily from the IRS, like which cars are eligible for the tax credit. And then so just kind of like based on that, I just did research about the different models, and was on forums and reading reviews and things like that. but my research was pretty much all online.
Awesome. Thank you. So you used a lot of online resources, you used some of the resources from the federal government. Did folks, other folks have some different experiences? So Danielle, like, what resources did you tap into?
So on our end, in moving to Georgia, I couldn't rely on tax credits. They didn't really exist. Side note, go vote. But there weren't a lot of things in our area. And when we moved, our electric provider didn't offer those incentives to even do it, charging stations at home, like a level 2 charger at home, let alone the state itself. Little to no vehicles. That was another reason for pause in getting the first vehicle in Georgia, because they just weren't available. Those added additional incentives. They are on the horizon, and like that tide is quickly turning in the Southeast, very quickly. Even within this election year, and Justice 40 and all of those wonderful things coming. So a lot of the information that we got are friends, neighbors, and then you're talking about organizations. So obviously EVNoire being one. Word of mouth is always good because you can ask, like in this forum, those deep questions. The opportunities for ride and drives, you can physically ask an owner right there and then see it for yourself. Like, well, how do you plug in? How do you find those charging stations like Brian mentioned, or where's the app? And it's just boop, boop. Oh, okay. And then test drives. So Dr. Francis mentioned about Virginia. So there's organizations like Drive Electric RVA. There's events all across the country. We lived in different states, been to those different events like Drive Electric. Obviously, Earth Day, Earth Month is coming up in April. There are tons of things everywhere. So I plugged into those and then other networks. Well, EVNoire is online forum.
Awesome.
You just ask a question and like those kinds of things pop up and very easily. So it wasn't hard on my end. And then just to your point, Rachel, looking up how does that relate to my state, tax incentives, if there are there or not, and then just doing some research. That's how we found out about the free charging with Electrify America.
Awesome. Thank you, Danielle. And of course, for those who are on the line, if you reside in Virginia, definitely check out the Electrify Virginia website. So www.electrifyingva.com for more resources. And even if you live outside of Virginia, there's still some really great information about what it's like to be an EV owner, and can answer some of your questions that you might be, managing when trying to make that decision. All right, so let's keep this conversation going. It's really flowing really nicely, and thank you all for your questions in the audience too. We're going to get to those questions.
All right, so people want to know, how has driving impacted your daily life? Nika, we'll start with you. Are you still able to go to the store? Have you taken on new hobbies because you're not spending time at a gas station anymore? Are there any things that you've noticed that, like, hey, since you've been driving EV, these types of things in your life? Anything noteworthy like that?
I mean, like off the bat, the gas station thing, because I know I was talking to my dad, and he's in Indiana, and he was like, how much is gas down in Virginia? And I was like, oh, I really don't know. So I haven't been to the gas station in
Love that.
forever now. So I was like, yeah, I don't know. But no, cost savings, I would have to say, we have 4 vehicles. 3 of them are still ICE cars. But with my vehicle, and also we have solar panels at home too. So just charging, like, it's just been like a win-win financially, I guess, like just the extra money, like you said, to do extra hobbies and things. But I will say, after taking like I think the longest trip we went on at first was to VMI, and that's the first time I saw the car go into turtle mode. Like and we were looking for charging and things of that nature. So I will say it also made me investigate a little more, and I bought like a Tesla tap, so that way I wouldn't have to really worry about range anxiety too much with traveling, because if I see Tesla destination chargers, stuff like that. So I think it's just made me more curious in the whole realm of EV and just things that are going on environmentally, and
Yeah,
like
yeah.
what can I do day to day in my home to, you know, just propel that. And so, like I said, solar panels back in 2017, and then even then just researching to find the car that, you know, I wanted, took until 2022, but everything's working out, and it's just been, I don't know, really good, positive, have no
That's awesome.
complaints. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it aligns with research that Generation 180 has done about EV drivers. It's really once someone starts driving an EV, they start paying attention to those other things, like you're saying, what else they can do in their lives or their home and their communities to kind of support clean energy as well. And that's you know, a key part of Gen 180's Electrify Your Life campaign. Rachel, something similar with you, like now, you know, your new hobbies, or you know, don't eat potato chips because you're not stopping at the gas station, or I don't know what.
Well, there is
Anything?
that. Yeah,
Yeah,
we have Wawa up here in Pennsylvania, and there are fewer Wawa trips for sure, which is great from a sodium perspective. Um, the only thing I could think of is that I have a credit card that gives me points for filling up at the gas station, and now I need to get a new credit card because I'm not getting any points anymore. But
I
that's
love
probably my
that.
biggest complaint.
Yeah, okay, that's excellent. And Chris, Brian, or Danielle, any other
I I will say
lifestyle
this much.
noticing? Yeah,
I will say this much. I used to go to the QT gas station a lot, and I love the hot chocolate there. So I do go to the gas station to get hot chocolate. I'm sorry. But on a serious note, I I think today, and I've been driving a lot today, and I looked down probably at about 4:30 or 5 o'clock, and I was like 56%. And I was like, oh yeah. And that's what happens. You look down thinking, oh yeah, range anxiety for a quick second, because you know it's embedded in us. So I looked down, I'm like, oh yeah, let's just get over that. So that part. The other piece is, you know, your only concern is getting home. You're not stopping. So you're getting home and you forget things like, oh, I should have stopped at the grocery store. But going home and charging has been a blessing. Um, it's so much easier if you forget and you get up in the middle of the night, you go downstairs, you plug in, and life is good again. It's just not a real concern at all. And if you forget one night, it's no big deal, you know. So I think we've come a very long way, and I love the progress we're making. So
Yeah,
that's all I
so
gotta say.
let me add two quick things to this. Number one, everybody's talked about driving. That's probably the biggest change for me, sort of day to day, is I don't worry about you know, having to go pay for gas. It's just a pleasure to get in the car and drive, right? If I'm at a stoplight, 99% of the time, I know I'm going to be the first one to that merge, right? So there's some inherent fun in just the driving experience, right? You don't have to wait for the vehicle to go through first, second, third, fourth gears, right? You get linear power at 0 RPMs, right? So the performance in terms of straight line speed is you know, just an awesome driving experience. And then the other thing that I would mention is the fact that I don't have to worry about oil changes, timing belts, water pumps, and all of the other maintenance related items with an internal combustion engine, right? The electric motor has fewer moving parts than you have fingers on a single hand, right? So it's just the laws of physics that sort of show you that it's fundamentally a better technology. And frankly, we probably should have started this transition sooner, but we are where we are today. And as I said earlier, it's an exciting time.
I think that first off the line story is a great segue to Dr. Francis's next question.
Yeah, you know what? So obviously we're talking about, our charging experiences and what that has been like for folks. So this is a question that may give you guys kind of like pause and cause you to reflect. So would you still recommend an EV to, those of the folks, friends, who might be chiming in here tonight? Would you still recommend that an EV if you can't charge at home? Like, what are your thoughts about that? And like I see you were nodding your head. What are you thinking? How do you react to that?
I'm thinking, yeah, even though most of us are homeowners on the panel, I'm certain, and we can plug up at home and not worry about it. I'm noticing I have some friends that live in apartment complexes, and I'm starting to see them starting to install more EV chargers in apartment complexes. So, that's a plus for tenants that are staying there. And just the availability now, like going to Walmart, some of the Walmarts have Electrify America stations. Some of the Sheetz gas stations have Electrify America or Charge Point, chargers. So maybe you're not stopping, maybe you're not going directly home to charge a vehicle on the way, but you can at least stop at those locations and charge relatively cheap. I want to say if I don't charge at home, I'll either charge and spend no more than I think $20, and I'm done charging in about 15 minutes. And I'm on my way. So, I wouldn't say just because you can't charge at home, that shouldn't stop you from exploring your EV options. And also, I still think it would be cost savings on the end of that. So yeah, definitely don't let not having that ability at home stop you from enjoying this technology and what's coming down the pipeline in the future. So
Thank you, Nika. I saw Danielle. I saw you jump in, ready to share your experience. So, what are your thoughts? What do you think about this particular question? Would you still recommend it? If they can't charge at home, what are your thoughts?
Highly recommended, especially now when ICE or combustible engines used vehicles are just as expensive as new ones. The price point and the longevity of even a used electric vehicle, you do get more bang for your buck, as Nika was saying. And even Chris and Brian mentioned too, now is a great time. If you can plug in your cell phone, then there's a will and a way for you to charge your electric vehicle. What's called what we call a trickle trip. But if you're at work, you're going to be there even part-time, 4 hours, etc., or a little longer, 48 hours. You'll have some charge, as Chris mentioned too in his example. You're going to have some charge to get you to at least your next stop. So there are people who live in rural communities who have the same issues as people who live in urban communities. Like if there's no electric charging station, if you live in an apartment complex, or if you live in a rural community and there's no charging station near you, the situation is still the same. But if you have an extension cord, you have a lifeline. So I don't want that it's a real thing. So even us, we went to Blue Ridge, just a day trip at hour north, just to get a change of scenery. And there are no charging stations, but we brought an extension cord. So it took 8 hours, but we got about 20, 30 miles and we were good and didn't have to pay for it. So I don't want people to be discouraged just because if you're sharing an apartment with your roommates, or, if you live in New York City, if you can plug in somewhere, like you said, there's a will, there's a way. And it's an exciting time because there are plenty of programs such as Electrifying Virginia, even Mid-Atlantic. There's another Mid-Atlantic Electrification Partnership who are putting charging stations in the ground for people, like in policy. A lot of things, even with EVNoire, EVHybridNoire, like you get a lot of resources. There are things that you don't have to wait until 2030. So please don't be discouraged. If you know how to operate a smartphone, you're fine. You're
And
good.
Danielle, I say, if you have some place to plug that smartphone, then you have some place to plug in
Yeah.
your
Worst case scenario, you do like us. Like you just get a 100-foot extension cord. You're good. Or just like my when I got my driver's license, my dad gave me the safety kit. You have the flares and jumper cables and things like that. All of those things do exist even for electric vehicles. There are portable charges. So if you if you need a boost, just like you said, Dr. Francis, you can get a little juice in your car and keep going. So there's so many things out now. Don't be
Yeah,
discouraged.
a lot of employers are also installing level 2 chargers at work.
Yep.
So I would encourage folks, there's no question, if you have charging at home, that's the ideal scenario. But if you don't, the team here has already talked about some options, but don't forget to take a look around the parking lot at work, right?
I'm glad you mentioned that too. And you can advocate. You might not be the only person who needs it at work.
Yeah.
And the job, the company can get incentives too.
Yeah, and I will plug here. Here's a quick commercial. If you are on the call and you think that your employer or you want your employer to be more engaged and consider installing workplace charging, we are working on a project called Charge at Work that could help your employer make those decisions. So definitely reach out to us and let us know if we can help you with that process. And one of the things I always say is that people think that they drive so much further than they actually do, but the average person is only driving about between 25 and 50 miles a day. And all of the EVs on the market today, I promise you, you can go to electrifyingvirginia.com to see for yourself. They all will give you at least that amount of range and much more, because they all start at around 250 to 300 mile range right now. So you don't have to worry about that anymore like we did 10, 11 years ago, like when Brian first got his first EV or Chris got his first EV. But I want us to talk a little bit about that maintenance and service and what that looks like for EVs. So I'm going to toss it over to Stuart to take a little deeper dive into that.
Yeah, thanks. And we have time's flying, so we have time for about 3 more questions. But we see this question in the chat: is it true that less maintenance? Have you experienced less maintenance with your EV, and do you miss going to Jiffy Lube? Rachel, start with you.
Well, I've only had my car for like 6 months or so now, so I would not expect there to be any maintenance yet. But that was one of the selling points to me was, and from my online research, learned that just what others have been saying is that there's very few moving parts, and all the parts that have to be serviced in an ICE vehicle are not there in an EV. So you have to get your tires rotated, but that's about it. I also talked to my mechanic about getting an EV before I did. And I said, like, have you been seeing any problems? And he said, the only EVs that come in here, we're just inspecting them. They never need anything. I was like, that sounds good. Sign me up for that.
And you can be certain that no one will steal your catalytic converter. That's an added bonus. Nika, similar experience? Your maintenance has not been an issue?
No, not an issue at all. Just, take it in for its checkup every 10,000 miles or whatever. And I just added windshield wiper fluid like a few months ago. That's about it. Everything is simple. It's easy.
And Chris and Danielle, Brian, similar experience?
I'll say this much. And Brian, of course, has had more experience here, but I've had 2 used EVs, and my last one was new. And my Nissan Leaf to this day, my brother has that car now. To this day, we took it to Nissan, and Nissan said, "Yeah, we can flush the brake fluid if you want." That was it, and that's a 2013. Just gonna put that in perspective. Does have the battery range issue, but outside of that, it's amazing. My other car, I did had one problem that went wrong, and we got that fixed. Never had another problem with it as far as drivetrain and battery goes. So it's just, been wonderful.
Amazing.
Yeah, I was looking up on the mobile app for one of our older EVs from 2016. Because I think this is a good example, right? This vehicle has 127,500 miles. 127,500 miles is what is on the odometer as I look at this right now. And over the course of those 8 years or so that we've had that vehicle, last year was really the first time that I had to take it in. Last February, almost exactly a year ago, I took it in for brakes. So just think about that. Brakes at north of 100,000 miles for the first time. The biggest maintenance challenge, and this goes back to the earlier point about these vehicles being fun to drive. Well, there's a price to be paid because they're heavier, right? Because of the batteries. And if you're stomping it off the line, like you're Mario Andretti at every single stoplight, the price to be paid there is in the form of tires, right? And that was the main thing that we did was we had to get new tires. Fortunately for us, it wasn't until about 30,000 miles or so, every 30,000 miles, which I think is reasonable to get new tires. But other than that, that's the only other vehicle maintenance that we had was to replace brake pads at about 120,000 miles.
I just wanted a point of comparison. Before the vehicle, I ended up donating it. I had a previous, I like what we call the baby SUVs. So I had a Chevy Equinox 2014. So I got it in 2013. So super brand new, not a mile on it. And granted, I did drive a lot. I had different projects on 13 different counties. So I drove that one a lot, 140,000 miles, just to compare what Brian just mentioned, 140,000 miles. My maintenance experience was quite different than his 2016. Brakes and rotors, obviously, shocks and struts. And mind you, I go early for maintenance. So oil changes, one, because nobody wants to walk down I-95, so I'm religious about the maintenance. So oil changed, everything was as scheduled or early. Had 5 sets of tires, and I'm not Mario Andretti. It was a V4 because it was supposed to be a second car. The car wouldn't allow me to be Mario Andretti. So I said all that to say that alone was several thousand, dollars. And then last year, what prompted me early, because I wanted an Ocean, I was waiting for the Cadillac Lyric for the next edition, but the Equinox, I had to do another pair of brakes, tires, and transmission. And I'm like, this car has been paid off almost twice over. Like, I've already paid this car off. That was another reason why we wanted to keep it. And then it was like, oh, it's just 2,000 here. You're not making car payments. However, the maintenance could have easily paid for a used EV. So that's when we were like, and then the incentives, So there's no issue. I mean, granted, like Rachel, this car is very new, but trust and believe I'm not going to be doing all of that maintenance.
Yeah.
There's no engine, and there's no transmission. Like already, I saved myself $3,000. I don't have to rebuild it in transmission.
Love that. Okay, we've moved into the lightning round, the final 2 questions in the last 3 minutes. Thanks everyone for being here, and thanks to our EV owners. lightning round. Dr. Shelley, let's
Oh,
hear your lightning round question.
okay, my lightning round question is, what advice do you have for somebody who's considering getting an EV? Because of course, a lot of the people that came on tonight want to know what it's like to have an EV, so that's why they're here. So what wisdom, what advice would you give them in terms of what things that they should consider, what they should consider as a potential, vehicle choice? And so, hey, we'll start with Brian. You're off the mic, so go for it. We'll go with you first. So we'll do real quick responses.
Do it. It's like Nike. Just do it. Unless you have a situation where you have to be doing long distance towing, that really is the only use case for which EVs aren't fully sorted right now, right? Everything else, just do it, right? I talk to people all the time that are buying new cars, and like, well, if it's not electric, you might as well buy a donkey, right? Because we're taking a trip back to the past, right? We should be, if we're going to pay, the average cost of a new car is $48,000, right? It really should be an electric vehicle, and at that price point, there are at least a couple handfuls, if not more, of options that are out there, whether it's a small sedan, crossover SUV, larger SUV, and so on.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Brian. What about, we'll go to Rachel, you next. What advice would you give to someone who's considering an EV?
Do it and plan your charge first if you don't have somewhere to charge at home.
Awesome. Micah, Chris.
To Rachel's point, do it. But if you're going long distance trips, I've driven from here to Indiana, 637 miles. And all you do is plot your course, just do your due diligence and have a plan A, B, and C.
Awesome. And just so we have a number of members who have driven from California to Georgia to DC and back to the West Coast, and they made it. So it's an afterthought. You can do it. What about Chris and Danielle? What are your thoughts?
I think going into that decision, it's definitely a do it. However, I will say this. Think about what your use case is. I think we talked a little bit about towing, and someone that's doing a lot of driving, you need to look at, well, where are the charges in my area? And there's many apps to help you find that. Google Maps is getting better with it, but just wanted to point this out. There's a better route planner out there. There's PlugShare. There's all these different things to give you a lot of confidence. And I think when you see those options, you'll be like, I had no idea so many charges exist. And that's probably the one thing we haven't really mentioned, that there's all these wonderful options to find out where charges are that's close to you. It'll blow your mind.
Awesome. Danielle?
Absolutely. Jump right in. Not only charging, in addition to what Chris mentioned, are vehicle options. You can work, your first car can be an EV. Young folks, or even, those who rely on public transit. You can work at any fast food chain and afford an EV. So the price points are quite affordable. You can get a great vehicle, like Chris mentioned, used vehicle under 10,000. And don't be afraid. Brian just mentioned that he has a car from 2016 over 100,000 miles, because the mileage doesn't matter. You don't have a powertrain. You don't have an engine. So just go ahead, ask the questions. Used vehicles in the EV space mean nothing. I mean, you still want to do, like Chris mentioned, in your use case, but just because you have a 2015, now mind you, the bells and whistles on a 2015 are far outweigh those in an ICE vehicle because of the technology. And you can get a great vehicle, reliable vehicle for under 10, or whatever varying price point. So go ahead, help the universe, help yourself, help your pockets.
Thank you, everyone. Before we have that final question, it's just a one answer question. It's super easy. Make sure and check out EVNoire's electrifyingvirginia.com partnership and Generation180's Going Electric pledge to make your next car electric. So final question before we wrap up. Thanks everyone for joining. Thanks to our EV owners. Thanks to EV Hybrid Noir. Okay, last question. Yes or no? Is your next car going to be electric? Nika?
Oh, most definitely.
Rachel?
Heck yes.
All right, Brian?
Yes, sir.
Danielle?
Absolutely.
Chris, bring us home. Come on, make us 4 for 4 here.
I didn't
5 for
know
5.
there were other options. What? There's other options out there? Who's making this stuff?
Thank you, everyone, so much. It was good fun. And hope to see you again at future EVNoire and Gen180 events.
Yes.
Have a great Friday and weekend.
Yeah, take care, everybody. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.